The dust cloud rising from the trail could only mean one thing. Another stranger was coming to ruin everything, and Tessa Jenkins watched from the window of her small cabin with her hand resting protectively on the deed that had cost her everything to obtain. She had buried a husband 6 months ago, watched pneumonia steal the breath from his lungs during the brutal winter of 1878, and now in the spring warmth of Beaver, Utah, she was determined that no man would ever hold power over her heart or her land again. The rider approaching was tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the mountains, and she could already feel the trouble he would bring before he even knocked on her door. Tessa turned away from the window and checked the rifle propped against the fireplace. She was 24 years old, widowed, and in possession of 200 acres of prime grazing land that bordered the largest ranch in the territory. She knew what men thought when they saw a woman alone with property. They thought opportunity. They thought weakness. They thought they could smile and charm their way into ownership. But Tessa had learned in her brief marriage that love was a trap, a pretty word men used to cage women, and she would not be caged again. The knock came firm and respectful. Tessa waited a full minute before crossing to the door, making sure he understood that his arrival was not anticipated or particularly welcome. She opened it to find a man in his late 20s, clean-shaven with dark hair that fell slightly over his forehead and eyes the color of the summer sky. He held his hat in his hands and offered a smile that probably worked on most women. "Madam, my name is Jackson Zimmerman. I own the ranch that borders your property to the west. I wanted to introduce myself properly and discuss a matter of mutual interest." "I am not interested in selling," Tessa said flatly. Jackson's smile did not falter. "I am not here to buy. May I come in? What I have to say concerns your water rights and a problem we are both going to face come summer." Against her better judgment, Tessa stepped aside. Jackson entered and remained standing until she gestured toward one of the 2 chairs at her table. He sat, placing his hat on his knee, and she noticed the calluses on his hands. Whatever else he might be, he was not afraid of work. "The creek that runs through both our properties is fed by snowmelt from the mountains," Jackson began. "Last year, it nearly dried up by August. This year, with less snow this winter, it will be worse. I propose we work together to dig a proper irrigation system that serves both our needs." "Why would you help me?" Tessa asked, suspicion sharp in her voice. "Because I need your permission to run the ditch through your land in certain places, and because helping you helps me. The cattle do not care about property lines when they are thirsty. If your land dries up, you will be forced to sell to someone who might not be as reasonable about water sharing." It was a logical argument, and Tessa hated that it made sense. She studied Jackson's face for signs of deception, and found only an open honesty that unsettled her more than any lie would have. "I will consider it," she said. "But I make my own decisions about my land, and I do not need a man to tell me what is best." "I would never presume to tell you what is best, Mrs. Jenkins. I am simply offering to work together for mutual benefit." "It is Miss Jenkins now," Tessa said coldly. "My husband is dead." Something flickered in Jackson's eyes, but whether it was pity or something else, she could not tell. He stood, placed his hat back on his head, and moved toward the door. "I am sorry for your loss. If you decide you want to discuss the irrigation system, my ranch is 5 miles west on the main road. You are welcome anytime." After he left, Tessa stood at the window watching him ride away. She told herself that the strange feeling in her chest was anger at his presumption, nothing more. She would not be swayed by a handsome face or kind words. She had already decided that love was not for her, and no cowboy rancher would change her mind. 3 days later, Tessa rode out to inspect the creek that ran through her property. The water level was indeed lower than it should be for early spring, and she could see where Jackson's cattle had trampled the banks on his side, making the flow muddy and uncertain. She followed the creek upstream toward the mountains, noting every twist and turn, calculating where a ditch might be dug to maximize water flow to her own land. She was so focused on her observations that she did not hear the riders until they were nearly upon her. 3 men, rough-looking and unwashed, spread out to block her path. Tessa's hand went to the rifle on her saddle, but the leader, a man with a scar running down his left cheek, shook his head. "I would not do that, lady. We just want to talk business." "I have no business with you," Tessa said, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "See, that is where you are wrong. My boss, Mr. Carver, he owns the big ranch on the east side of Beaver. He has been wanting to expand, and your little piece of land sits right where he needs it. He sent us to make you an offer. Tell Mr. Carver I am not selling." The scarred man leaned forward in his saddle. "He figured you might say that, so here is the thing. You are all alone out here, no husband, no help. Accidents happen to people who are stubborn. Fires start. Cattle stampede. Would be a shame if something happened to you or your property." The threat was clear, and Tessa felt her blood turn to ice. She had heard of Carver, a ruthless man who had built his empire through intimidation and violence. Before she could respond, the sound of hoofbeats echoed from the west, and Jackson Zimmerman appeared over the rise with 4 of his ranch hands. The scarred man's expression soured, but he pulled his horse back. "This is not over. You think about that offer, Mrs. Jenkins. Think real hard." The 3 men rode off, and Jackson dismounted, his face dark with concern. "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" "I can take care of myself," Tessa said, but her hands were shaking on the reins. "I am sure you can, but Carver's men are dangerous. I have dealt with them before. They do not make idle threats." He looked up at her, and she saw genuine worry in his eyes. "Please come back to my ranch. We need to talk about this." Tessa wanted to refuse, to ride back to her cabin and prove that she needed no man's protection, but she was not a fool. Carver had resources she could not match alone, and if Jackson knew something about dealing with him, she needed to hear it. At Jackson's ranch, Tessa was surprised by the size of the operation. The main house was 2 stories, well-maintained, with a wide porch and windows that caught the afternoon light. Corrals and outbuildings spread across several acres, and she counted at least 20 horses in various pens. This was not the ranch of a man barely scraping by. This was success, built through hard work and smart decisions. Inside, Jackson's housekeeper, an older woman named Mrs. Patterson, brought coffee and fresh bread. Jackson sat across from Tessa at a large wooden table and spread out a map of the area. "Carver has been buying up land for 3 years, Jackson explained, pointing to marked sections on the map. "He uses fear and intimidation to get what he wants, and if that does not work, he gets violent. 2 years ago, a farmer who refused to sell had his barn burned. Another man was beaten so badly he could not work his land and had to sell for a fraction of what it was worth." "Why has no one stopped him?" Tessa asked. "Because he is careful. He never does anything himself, and his men are loyal because he pays well. The sheriff in Beaver is either scared of him or paid off, maybe both. The few times someone has tried to press charges, witnesses disappear or change their stories." Tessa felt the weight of hopelessness settling on her shoulders. "So what do? I will not sell to him. That land is all I have." Jackson reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. The touch was warm and sent an unexpected jolt through her system. "You do not face this alone. If you agree, I can post some of my men on your property. Carver will not risk an open confrontation with me. My ranch is too big, and I have too many connections in the territory. He knows that attacking you while you are under my protection would be a mistake." Tessa pulled her hand back. "I do not need a protector. I need to stand on my own." "Pride is admirable, but it does not stop bullets or fires," Jackson said gently. "Let me help you. Not because you are weak, but because Carver is strong. There is no shame in accepting help when you are outnumbered." Every instinct told Tessa to refuse, to ride home and face whatever came alone. But she thought of her husband's grave, of the hard work she had put into keeping the ranch running through the winter, of the dreams she had for building something lasting. If she lost everything to Carver's thugs, all of that would be for nothing. "Fine," she said. "But this is a business arrangement. I will pay your men for their time." "We can work out fair compensation," Jackson agreed. "The irrigation system will benefit both of us. Consider their protection part of our partnership." "I do not want a partnership," Tessa said sharply. "I want to be left alone to run my ranch in peace." Jackson leaned back in his chair, studying her with those unsettling blue eyes. "Why are you so determined to push everyone away?" "Because caring about people gives them power over you," Tessa said. "Love is just another word for giving someone the ability to destroy you. That is a lonely way to live. Lonely is safe." Jackson shook his head slowly. "I disagree, but I will respect your wishes. This will be a business arrangement, nothing more. Though I have to tell you, Miss Jenkins, you are wrong about love. The right person does not destroy you, they make you stronger." "You are a romantic fool," Tessa said, but there was less bite in her words than she intended. "Maybe," Jackson said with a small smile. "But I would rather be a fool who believes in love than someone so scared of being hurt that they refuse to live." The words struck deeper than Tessa wanted to admit. She stood abruptly. "I should get back before dark. When will your men arrive?" "Tomorrow morning." "2 men. Good workers, trustworthy. They will stay in your barn if that is acceptable, and they will keep watch at night. During the day, they can help with whatever work you need done." Tessa nodded and left without another word. As she rode home through the lengthening shadows, she tried to convince herself that the warmth in her chest was simply relief at having protection from Carver's threats. It had nothing to do with the way Jackson had looked at her, or the gentleness in his voice, or the strength in his hands. She had meant what she said. She would never love again. Love had brought her nothing but pain. The next morning, 2 of Jackson's ranch hands arrived as promised. The older one, a man named Tom with graying hair and kind eyes, introduced himself and his companion, a younger man named Pete who could not have been more than 20. "Mr. Zimmerman says we are to help you with whatever you need and keep an eye out for trouble," Tom said. "We will stay out of your way as much as possible, madam." Tessa showed them the barn and the small tack room where they could sleep. They settled in without fuss, and by mid-morning, Tom was helping her repair a section of fence while Pete rode the perimeter of the property. As the days passed, Tessa fell into a routine with the men. Tom was a skilled carpenter and helped her fix the leaking roof on the chicken coop. Pete was good with horses and worked with her mare, who had been acting skittish since winter. They were respectful, never presuming or making her feel like they were taking over. But their presence was a constant reminder that Jackson Zimmerman was in her life now, whether she wanted him to be or not. A week after the men arrived, Jackson rode up to check on them and discuss the irrigation project. Tessa invited him in for coffee, telling herself it was simple courtesy and nothing more. "I have been thinking about the ditch system," Jackson said, spreading a rough sketch on the table. "If we dig here, we can channel water to both our properties efficiently. It will take about 3 weeks of hard work, but it will be worth it come summer." Tessa studied the plan and had to admit it was well thought out. "When do we start?" "As soon as you agree." "I will bring 6 men, and if Tom and Pete join us, along with yourself if you want to be part of it. We should have enough workers to get it done." "I will be part of it," Tessa said firmly. "I do not sit by while others work my land." Jackson smiled. "I did not think you would." "We start tomorrow at dawn." The work was backbreaking. Digging through rocky Utah soil under the spring sun tested everyone's endurance. Tessa worked alongside the men, her hands blistering despite the gloves she wore, her back aching by the end of each day. But she refused to show weakness, and she noticed that Jackson worked just as hard as anyone, never asking his men to do anything he would not do himself. On the fourth day, Jackson worked beside her in the ditch, both of them covered in dirt and sweat. They fell into an easy rhythm, shoveling in sync, and Tessa found herself relaxing in his presence despite her determination to keep him at a distance. "You are a good worker," Jackson said during a water break. "I have had to be. My husband was sick for months before he died. I ran the ranch alone while taking care of him. That must have been difficult." Tessa took a long drink from her canteen. "It was necessary, that is all." "Did you love him?" The question surprised her with its directness. She considered lying, but something about the openness in Jackson's face made her tell the truth. "I thought I did when we married. He was kind and promised me a good life, but marriage is not what I thought it would be. It is work and worry and watching someone you care about suffer while you are powerless to help. When he died, I grieved, but I also felt relief. That makes me a terrible person, I suppose." "It makes you human," Jackson said. "Grief is complicated. Relief does not mean you did not care." "I cared," Tessa said, "but I will never put myself through that again. Caring about someone means they can hurt you, and I am done being hurt." Jackson was quiet for a moment, watching her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "I understand being afraid of pain. My parents died when I was 19. Cholera outbreaks swept through their wagon train on the way west. I survived, and I came here alone with nothing but the money they had saved and a dream of building a ranch. For years, I focused only on work, on building something that would last. I told myself that was enough. And now," Tessa asked despite herself, "now I think I was hiding. Work is important, but it is not everything. A ranch is just land and cattle if you have no one to share it with." "I am sharing my land with no one," Tessa said firmly. "I do not need someone to make my life complete." Jackson smiled, but there was sadness in it. "What if I said I did not want to complete you? What if I just wanted to walk beside you? Then I would say you are wasting your time. I told you from the start, I will never love you or anyone else. Love is a trap and I am done being caught." "Then I will love enough for both of us," Jackson said quietly. Tessa stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What? You heard me. I am not going to push you or force you to feel something you do not feel. But I am also not going to pretend I do not care about you. From the moment I saw you in that cabin, fierce and determined and unafraid, I knew you were special. So if you cannot love me, that is fine. I will love you enough for both of us, and maybe someday you will realize that not all love ends in pain." "You are insane," Tessa said, but her heart was pounding. "Probably," Jackson agreed. "But I have never been afraid of hard work, and I figure winning your trust is just another challenge worth facing." He picked up his shovel and went back to digging, leaving Tessa standing in stunned silence. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Her husband had courted her with pretty words and promises, but there had always been an expectation of reciprocation. Jackson was offering love with no demands, no conditions, just a simple statement of intent. It terrified her. That night, lying in her bed and listening to Tom and Pete moving around in the barn, Tessa tried to sort through her confused feelings. She had built walls around her heart for good reasons. Her marriage had taught her that love faded, that promises broke, that people left whether through death or disappointment. Jackson was offering something that sounded too good to be true, and she had learned long ago that things that seemed too good to be true usually were. But as the days passed and the irrigation ditch took shape, Tessa could not deny that Jackson was different. He never pushed her for more than she was willing to give. He never assumed authority over her decisions. When they disagreed about the placement of a section of the ditch, he listened to her reasoning and admitted when her idea was better. He treated her as an equal, something her husband had never quite managed despite his kindness. 2 weeks into the project, a spring storm rolled through Beaver with violent intensity. Rain poured from the sky in sheets, and thunder shook the ground. Tessa was in her cabin when she heard shouting from outside. She grabbed her coat and ran out to find Pete struggling to control her panicked horses, while Tom worked to secure the barn doors that were threatening to tear off in the wind. She was helping Tom when she heard a crash and turned to see part of her chicken coop collapse under the force of the wind. The chickens scattered in panicked flight, and Tessa ran toward them, trying to herd them toward shelter. Rain blinded her, and wind nearly knocked her off her feet. She was chasing a particularly stubborn hen when she slipped in the mud and went down hard, her ankle twisting beneath her. Pain shot up her leg and she gasped, trying to push herself up. Strong hands lifted her and she found herself in Jackson's arms. She had not even known he was there, but he must have ridden over when the storm hit. "I've got you," he shouted over the wind. He carried her into the cabin and set her gently on her bed. His clothes were soaked, his hair plastered to his head, but his focus was entirely on her ankle. "Let me see," he said, kneeling beside the bed. He removed her boot carefully and Tessa bit back a cry of pain. The ankle was already swelling. Jackson examined it with gentle hands, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I do not think it is broken, but it is badly sprained. You need to stay off it for at least a week." "I do not have time to stay off it," Tessa protested. "There is too much work to be done." "The work will get done," Jackson said firmly. "Tom and Pete are here and I will bring more men if necessary. But you are not walking on this ankle until it heals. You cannot tell me what to do." Jackson looked up at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "I am not telling you what to do. I am begging you to take care of yourself. Please, Tessa, let someone help you for once." It was the first time he had used her first name, and hearing it from his lips did something strange to her heart. She wanted to argue to assert her independence, but the pain in her ankle was making her dizzy, and she was suddenly very tired of fighting everything alone. "Fine," she whispered, "but just until it heals." Jackson smiled and it transformed his face. "Just until it heals," he agreed. He stood and moved toward the door, but Tessa called out, "Wait, you are soaked. You should change into something dry before you ride back." "I do not have anything here to change into." "There are clothes in the trunk at the foot of the bed. My husband's clothes." "I have been meaning to get rid of them. You are about his size." Jackson hesitated, clearly unsure if this was appropriate, but another violent gust of wind rattled the windows, and he nodded. He pulled out a dry shirt and pants from the trunk and went into the small room off the main cabin to change. When he emerged, Tessa felt a pang of something complicated. Seeing Jackson in her dead husband's clothes should have bothered her, but instead it felt right, as if those clothes had been waiting for someone who could fill them properly. "Thank you," Jackson said. "I will get these back to you clean." "Keep them," Tessa said. "I do not need them." Jackson studied her for a long moment. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. They are just clothes. They do not mean anything." But they both knew that was not entirely true. It was a letting go, a small step toward releasing the past, and Jackson seemed to understand the significance of the gesture. The storm raged for 2 more days, and Jackson stayed at the cabin, sleeping in the main room while Tessa remained in her bed. He cooked simple meals, tended to her ankle with cold compresses from the well, and made sure she stayed off her feet. Tom and Pete checked in regularly, reporting that the animals were secure, and the main structures had weathered the storm intact. During the long hours trapped inside by the rain, Tessa and Jackson talked. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about the journey west with his parents and the terror of watching them die, about the years of hard work building his ranch from nothing. She told him about her childhood in Illinois, about marrying young because it seemed like the right thing to do, about the loneliness of her marriage even before her husband got sick. He was not a bad man, Tessa said on the second evening, watching firelight dance across the ceiling. But we did not really know each other when we married. We thought we were in love, but it was just loneliness and timing. By the time we realized we were not really suited to each other, we were already married and moving west. Then he got sick, and there was no time to figure out if we could have made it work. "Do you think you could have?" Jackson asked from his bedroll near the fire. "I do not know. Maybe, but it does not matter now. He is gone and I am alone, and that is how I want it to be." "You do not sound convinced." Tessa turned her head to look at him. In the firelight, his face was half in shadow, but his eyes caught the light and held it. "I am convinced that depending on someone is dangerous. I am convinced that loving someone gives them power to destroy you. I watched my husband die slowly, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I will never be that powerless again." Jackson sat up, wrapping his arms around his knees. "Love does not make you powerless, Tessa. It makes you vulnerable, and that is not the same thing. Being vulnerable means trusting someone enough to let them see who you really are. It means taking a risk that they might hurt you because the possibility of connection is worth more than the safety of isolation. Easy for you to say. You have not lost someone you loved. I lost my parents. I know what grief feels like. That is different. Parents are supposed to go first. Losing a spouse is losing your future, not your past." Jackson was quiet for a long moment. "You are right. I have not lost a spouse. But I have been alone for a long time, and I can tell you that loneliness is its own kind of death. You are not living, Tessa. You are just surviving, and that is not enough. It is enough for me. Is it? Because from where I am sitting, you seem like someone who is terrified of actually living in case it hurts." The words stung because they were true. Tessa turned away, blinking back tears. "You should go back to your ranch when the storm clears. I do not need a philosopher. I need a business partner who knows his place." "My place is wherever you need me to be," Jackson said softly, "whether you want to admit it or not." The storm broke the next morning, leaving the land washed clean and the sky a brilliant blue. Jackson returned to his ranch after making sure Tessa had everything she needed, and she was left alone with Tom and Pete and her confused thoughts. Her ankle healed slowly over the next 2 weeks. Tom and Pete finished the irrigation ditch with help from Jackson's crew, and when it was complete, Tessa had to admit it was impressive. Water now flowed reliably through her property, ensuring that her land would stay productive even in the driest months of summer. Jackson came by every few days, always with a legitimate reason, checking on the ditch, bringing supplies, discussing ranch business. But Tessa knew the real reason was to see her, and despite her determination to keep him at a distance, she found herself looking forward to his visits. One afternoon in late May, Jackson arrived with a proposition. "There is a dance in Beaver this Saturday. The town holds them once a month in the spring and summer. I would be honored if you would attend with me." Tessa's first instinct was to refuse. Going to a dance with Jackson would be seen as a courtship by everyone in town, and she did not want to encourage speculation. But she had not been to town since before her husband died, and part of her missed the social interaction, the music, the sense of being part of a community. "I will go to the dance," she said carefully, "but I will meet you there. I do not want people getting the wrong idea." Jackson's smile was knowing but not mocking. "Whatever makes you comfortable." The night of the dance, Tessa spent an embarrassing amount of time deciding what to wear. She finally settled on a simple blue dress that her husband had always said brought out the color of her eyes. She told herself she was not dressing up for Jackson, that she simply wanted to look respectable for the townspeople. But when she arrived at the church hall where the dance was being held and saw Jackson's face light up at the sight of her, she knew she had been lying to herself. The hall was crowded with ranchers, farmers, shopkeepers, and their families. A small band played fiddle music in the corner, and the smell of punch and cookies filled the air. Tessa was greeted warmly by several women she had known before her husband's death, and she was surprised by how good it felt to be part of the community again. Jackson approached her after she had been there for about 20 minutes. "May I have this dance?" Tessa hesitated, aware that every eye in the hall was on them. But the music was lively, and Jackson's smile was warm, and she found herself nodding. He took her hand and led her onto the floor. He was a good dancer, confident but not showy, and Tessa found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the music. They danced 2 songs before taking a break for punch, and during that time, Tessa became aware of the whispers and speculative looks from the other townspeople. "They are all wondering if we are courting," she said quietly. "Let them wonder," Jackson replied. "Unless it bothers you." "It does not bother me. I just do not want you to get your hopes up. This is just a dance." "I know what this is," Jackson said. "And I am not expecting anything more than what you are willing to give. I told you, I will love enough for both of us. That includes being patient." Later that evening, as Tessa was speaking with Mrs. Patterson near the refreshment table, a commotion near the door caught everyone's attention. 3 men entered, and Tessa's blood ran cold when she recognized the scarred man from Carver's ranch. He was dressed more formally than when she had last seen him, but there was no mistaking the menace in his eyes. He crossed the hall directly to her, ignoring the curious and concerned looks from the other attendees. "Miss Jenkins, good to see you again. I have been meaning to pay you another visit, but I hear you have been keeping company with Mr. Zimmerman here. That is real interesting." "This is not the place for your kind of business," Jackson said, stepping between Tessa and the scarred man. "I am just being social," the man said with a cold smile. "Mr. Carver sent me to remind Miss Jenkins that his offer is still on the table. In fact, given the improvements you have made to the land with that new irrigation system, he is willing to increase his price. $1,500 for 200 acres. That is generous." "I am not selling," Tessa said, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "You should think about it real careful. Mr. Carver does not like to be refused. He gets impatient, and when he gets impatient, accidents happen. Would be a shame if all that work on the irrigation system went to waste because someone damaged it, or if your barn burned down, or if something happened to you." Jackson moved so fast that Tessa barely saw him. One moment he was standing beside her, the next he had the scarred man by the front of his shirt, lifting him almost off his feet. "You just threatened her in front of 50 witnesses. That was stupid. You go back to Carver and you tell him that if anything happens to Miss Jenkins or her property, I will hold him personally responsible. And unlike you, I do not make idle threats." The scarred man tried to maintain his sneer, but there was fear in his eyes. Jackson was bigger and clearly stronger, and the entire hall had gone silent, watching the confrontation. "Mr. Carver is not going to like this." "I do not care what Carver likes. You stay away from Miss Jenkins, or you will answer to me." Jackson released the man with a slight shove, and the scarred man stumbled back. He shot Tessa a look full of venom, then turned and left with his two companions following. The hall erupted in whispers. The dance was ruined after that. People were too nervous to continue celebrating, and families began leaving early. Jackson walked Tessa to her wagon, his jaw tight with anger. "I am sorry about that," he said. "I should have handled it better." "You handled it fine," Tessa said, "but you made an enemy tonight. Carver will not forgive you for humiliating his man in public. Carver has been my enemy for years. This just makes it official." Jackson looked at her in the moonlight, his expression serious. "I meant what I said. If he comes after you, he will have to go through me. I do not want you to fight my battles. Too bad. Some battles are too big to fight alone, and you are going to have to accept that whether you like it or not." Tessa wanted to argue, but she was exhausted and shaken. Instead, she climbed into her wagon and took up the reins. "Thank you for the dance, Jackson." "Anytime," he said softly. "Be careful going home. I will have Tom and Pete stay extra alert tonight." The ride back to her ranch was tense. Tessa kept looking over her shoulder, expecting to see Carver's men following her, but the road remained empty. When she reached her cabin, Tom and Pete were waiting, having left the dance early to ensure the property was secure. "Mr. Zimmerman sent word about what happened," Tom said. "We have done a full patrol. Everything looks good, but we will take turns keeping watch tonight." Tessa thanked them and went inside, but she did not sleep much. She kept thinking about Jackson's face when he had grabbed Carver's man, the protective fury in his eyes, the absolute certainty in his voice when he had said he would love enough for both of them. She had meant to keep him at a distance to maintain her walls, but he was slowly dismantling them with patience and kindness, and a stubbornness that matched her own. In the morning, Jackson arrived with 6 men and a wagon full of supplies. "We are building you a proper barn," he announced. "Your current one is old and would burn too easily. If Carver is going to make threats, we are going to make sure you have structures that can withstand whatever he tries." "I cannot afford a new barn," Tessa protested. "Consider it part of our partnership. You gave me access to your land for the irrigation system. I am giving you a barn that will protect your animals and equipment. Fair trade." It was not a fair trade, and they both knew it, but Tessa was learning to pick her battles. She watched as Jackson and his men spent the next 3 weeks constructing a barn that was bigger and sturdier than anything she could have built herself. They used thick timber and reinforced the doors, and even installed a new lock that would be difficult to break. During the construction, Tessa worked alongside them when she could, and she and Jackson fell into an easy partnership. He had a way of making her laugh with dry observations about the work or stories about his ranch hands. He never pushed for more than friendship, but his presence was becoming as natural to her as breathing. One evening, after the men had left for the day and the barn was nearly complete, Jackson stayed behind to help Tessa with her evening chores. They worked in comfortable silence, feeding chickens and checking on the horses, and when they were done, they sat on the porch of her cabin watching the sun set over the mountains. "Why are you doing all this?" Tessa asked. "The barn, the protection, everything. I have given you nothing in return." "You have given me more than you realize," Jackson said. "You have given me a reason to wake up in the morning that is about more than just work. You have given me hope that maybe I am not meant to spend my life alone. I have told you repeatedly that I will never love you. I know. But I think you are lying, at least a little bit." Tessa turned to look at him. "Why would I lie about that? Because you are scared. Because admitting that you care about someone means admitting that they can hurt you. Because it is easier to push people away than to risk being happy. You think you have me all figured out. I think you have yourself figured out, and you are doing everything you can to make sure your own predictions come true. You have decided that love ends in pain, so you are determined to avoid it. But what if you are wrong? What if love could be the best thing that ever happened to you? Tessa stood abruptly. You should go. It is getting late. Jackson rose slowly, and for a moment she thought he might argue. Instead, he simply said, "Good night, Tessa. I will see you tomorrow." After he left, Tessa sat back down on the porch and let herself cry for the first time since her husband's funeral. She cried for the loneliness of the past year, for the fear that had kept her locked away, for the possibility of happiness that terrified her more than any threat from Carver ever could. The barn was completed in early June, and it was beautiful. Tessa moved her horses and equipment into the new structure, marveling at the craftsmanship and the security it provided. Jackson's men finished the final touches, and Tom and Pete continued their vigilant watch over the property. For 2 weeks, everything was quiet. The irrigation system worked perfectly, and Tessa's land began to flourish with the reliable water supply. She started to hope that maybe Carver had given up, that Jackson's warning had been enough to keep him at bay. She should have known better. The fire started in the middle of the night. Tessa woke to Tom shouting and the smell of smoke. She ran outside to see flames engulfing her old chicken coop, the one that had been partially damaged in the storm and that she had been meaning to tear down. Tom and Pete were already working to put out the fire with buckets of water from the well, and Tessa joined them, her heart racing with fear and anger. The new barn was far enough away that it was not in immediate danger, and they managed to contain the fire before it spread. When the flames were finally out, they stood in the smoky darkness, exhausted and covered in soot. This was deliberate, Pete said, pointing to the remains of what looked like a torch near the foundation of the coop. Someone set this. Carver, Tessa said, her voice shaking with rage. He is trying to scare me. It is working, Tom said grimly. Next time he might not pick a building that is mostly empty. We need to tell Mr. Zimmerman, Pete added. No, Tessa said. He has done enough. This is my problem. But Tom had already sent Pete riding to Jackson's ranch, and Tessa was too tired to protest. She went inside to wash the smoke from her face and hands, and by the time she emerged, Jackson was riding up with a group of armed men. He dismounted and crossed to her in 3 long strides, pulling her into his arms before she could object. Are you hurt? I am fine. It was just the old coop. We put it out before it spread. Jackson held her at arm's length, his eyes searching her face. This ends now. I am going to Carver's ranch in the morning, and I am going to make him understand that you are under my protection. I do not need you to fight my battles, Tessa said, but her protest was weak. She was exhausted and scared, and having Jackson's arms around her felt better than she wanted to admit. This is not just your battle anymore, Jackson said. Carver made it my battle when he threatened you. Let me handle this. How? By getting yourself killed. He has more men than you. I am not going to fight him. I am going to make him a business proposition he cannot refuse. The next morning, Jackson rode to Carver's ranch with Tom and 4 other armed men. Tessa insisted on going with them, and though Jackson argued, he eventually relented when he realized she would not be swayed. Carver's ranch was even larger than Jackson's, a sprawling operation with multiple buildings and dozens of workers. The main house was ostentatious. 2 stories of whitewashed wood with columns on the porch like some kind of plantation manor transplanted to the Utah desert. Carver himself met them on the porch, a heavy-set man in his 50s with a thick mustache and eyes like chips of flint. Zimmerman. To what do I owe this visit? We need to talk about Miss Jenkins's property, Jackson said, dismounting but keeping his hand near his gun. Your men have been harassing her, and last night someone tried to burn her out. That stops now." Carver spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. "I do not know what you are talking about. If someone has been causing trouble on Miss Jenkins's land, that has nothing to do with me." "We both know that is a lie," Jackson said. "So here is what is going to happen. You are going to leave Miss Jenkins alone, and in return, I am going to give you access to water from the irrigation system we built. Your eastern pastures have always struggled in the summer. With reliable water, they could support twice as many cattle." Carver's eyes narrowed with interest. "I am listening. You pay a fair price for the water rights. You sign a contract agreeing to leave Miss Jenkins's property alone, and everyone benefits. You get the water you need to expand. I get a neighbor who is not trying to intimidate my friends, and Miss Jenkins gets to run her ranch in peace. And if I refuse, then I go to the territorial governor, who happens to be a friend of mine from my Missouri days. I tell him about the suspicious fires, the intimidation, the violence you have been using to acquire land. I bring witnesses, including Miss Jenkins and my ranch hands. At the very least, you will face an investigation that will tie up your business for months. At worst, you will face criminal charges." Carver was silent for a long moment, his expression calculating. Tessa held her breath, waiting for his response. Finally, he smiled, though it did not reach his eyes. "You drive a hard bargain, Zimmerman. But I am a businessman, and your offer makes sense. I will agree to your terms, but I want the water rights in writing, and I want a fair price." "You will get both," Jackson said. "I will have the contracts drawn up by the end of the week. Until then, your men stay away from Miss Jenkins." "Agreed." They shook hands, and Tessa could see the relief in Jackson's shoulders as they rode away, but she also saw the tension that remained. Carver had agreed too easily, and that made her nervous. "You trust him?" she asked when they were out of earshot. "Not even a little," Jackson admitted. "But the contract will be legal and binding. If he breaks it, I will have grounds to take action. And with the governor involved, he will think twice before trying anything." "You have a friend who is the territorial governor?" Jackson smiled. "We grew up together in Missouri. He went into politics, I went into ranching, but we have stayed in touch over the years. I sent him a letter last week telling him about Carver's tactics. He wrote back saying he has had complaints about Carver from others and would be interested in any evidence I could provide. Carver does not know that, but it gave me leverage." Tessa shook her head in amazement. "You had this planned all along." "I have been thinking about how to handle Carver since the day his men threatened you. I was just waiting for the right moment. You could have told me. Would you have let me handle it if I had?" Tessa had to admit he was right. She would have insisted on facing Carver herself, and that might have ended badly. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You are welcome." They rode in silence for a while, the morning sun warming their backs. Tessa found herself studying Jackson's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way he sat his horse with easy confidence, the kindness in his eyes when he looked at her. She had spent months trying to keep him at a distance, but he had slowly worn down her defenses with patience and genuine care. He had never demanded anything from her, never made her feel like she owed him something in return for his help. He had simply loved her as he had promised, enough for both of them. "Jackson," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned to look at her. "Yes." "I need to tell you something." They stopped their horses, and Tessa struggled to find the right words. Her heart was pounding, and her palms were sweaty on the reins. "I have been unfair to you. I have been so determined not to get hurt again that I have been blind to what has been right in front of me. You have been patient and kind and generous, and I have given you nothing but resistance. You do not owe me anything, Tessa. Let me finish, please." She took a deep breath. "I have been lying to myself. I told myself I would never love again, that I did not need anyone, that I was better off alone. But the truth is, I have been falling for you since the day you told me you would love enough for both of us. I have been fighting it because I am scared, but I am tired of being scared. I am tired of being alone. Jackson dismounted and came to her horse, reaching up to help her down. When her feet touched the ground, he kept his hands on her waist, his eyes searching her face. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that you were right. Love does not make you powerless. It makes you vulnerable, but that is not the same thing. And I am ready to be vulnerable if it means being with you." Jackson's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gently at first, then with growing passion. Tessa wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring all the emotion she had been holding back into that single moment. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless. "I love you," Tessa said. "I should have said it weeks ago, but I was too stubborn and too scared." "I love you too," Jackson said. "I have loved you from the start, and I will love you for the rest of my life." "That is a big promise." "I am good at keeping promises." They kissed again, and Tessa felt something inside her heel, a broken place she had not even known was there. She had been so focused on protecting herself from pain that she had forgotten what joy felt like. But standing here in Jackson's arms, with the Utah sun on her face and the mountains stretching endlessly in all directions, she remembered. This was what living felt like. This was what love was supposed to be. Over the next few months, Tessa and Jackson's relationship deepened. They maintained separate ranches, but they worked together on shared projects and spent most evenings together, either at her cabin or his ranch house. Jackson was true to his word about respecting her independence. He never tried to take over her decisions or make her feel like she needed his permission for anything. They were partners in every sense of the word. The contract with Carver was signed and witnessed, and true to the agreement, his men stopped harassing Tessa. The water rights proved profitable for both Carver and the partnership between Tessa and Jackson. And by late summer, all three ranches were thriving. In August, Jackson proposed. He did it without fanfare, just the two of them sitting on her porch at sunset, watching the sky turn gold and purple. "I want to spend my life with you," he said simply. "I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build something lasting with you, not just ranches and irrigation systems, but a family and a future. Will you marry me, Tessa Jenkins?" Tessa did not hesitate. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They were married in September, in the same church hall where they had attended the dance. The whole town turned out for the wedding, and even Mrs. Patterson cried during the ceremony. Tessa wore a new dress made of cream-colored silk, and Jackson wore a black suit that made him look like he had stepped out of a catalog. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jackson kissed her with such joy that everyone in the hall cheered. The reception was lively, with music and dancing and enough food to feed half the county. Tessa danced with Jackson until her feet hurt, and when they finally left for Jackson's ranch house, their ranch house now, she felt happier than she had ever thought possible. That first night as husband and wife, lying in bed with Jackson's arms around her, Tessa marveled at how much her life had changed. A year ago, she had been alone and determined to stay that way, convinced that love only led to pain. Now she was married to a man who saw her as an equal, who respected her strength, and who loved her with a steadiness that made her feel safe without feeling trapped. "What are you thinking about?" Jackson asked, his voice drowsy. "About how wrong I was. About how glad I am that you did not give up on me." "I would never give up on you. I told you I would love enough for both of us, and I meant it." "You do not have to anymore," Tessa said, turning to look at him in the moonlight streaming through the window. I love you enough for both of us too now." Jackson smiled and pulled her closer. "Then we are going to have an embarrassing amount of love in this house. I can live with that." The first year of their marriage was an adjustment. Combining two ranches and two ways of doing things required compromise and patience, but they navigated the challenges together. Tessa moved most of her belongings to Jackson's larger house, but they kept her cabin as a guest house and storage space. Tom and Pete continued to work for them, and Jackson hired additional hands as the combined operation grew. In the spring of 1880, Tessa discovered she was pregnant. She had mixed feelings about the news. Her first marriage had been childless, and she had assumed she would never be a mother. The idea of bringing a new life into the world was both thrilling and terrifying. Jackson was overjoyed. He immediately began planning additions to the house: a nursery, a larger kitchen, a playroom for when the baby was older. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Tessa found her fears giving way to excitement. "What if I am not a good mother?" she asked one evening as they sat together reviewing the ranch accounts. "You will be an excellent mother," Jackson said with absolute certainty. "You are strong and fierce and loving. Our child will be lucky to have you." "Our child will be lucky to have both of us," Tessa corrected. Their son was born in December, a healthy baby with dark hair and his father's blue eyes. They named him James after Jackson's father. Holding her son for the first time, Tessa understood a whole new dimension of love. She had thought loving Jackson had opened her heart completely, but this was different. This was a love so fierce and protective that it made her previous fears seem small. Jackson was a devoted father from the start. He helped with night feedings, changed diapers without complaint, and could calm James's cries with a patience that amazed Tessa. Watching her husband rock their son to sleep, singing old songs from his childhood, Tessa felt her heart expand even further. The years that followed were full and rich. They had two more children: a daughter named Sarah in 1882 and another son named Thomas in 1884. The ranch prospered under their joint management, and they became respected members of the community. Tessa served on the church committee and helped organize the monthly dances that she and Jackson had attended on that fateful night. Jackson was elected to the town council and worked to improve roads and schools throughout the county. Carver kept his word about the contract, and over time, a cautious mutual respect developed between him and Jackson. They would never be friends, but they were no longer enemies, and that was enough. Tom retired in 1885, and they gave him a small plot of land on the edge of the ranch where he built a cabin and spent his days fishing and telling stories to their children. Pete married a girl from town and started his own small ranch with Jackson's help and mentorship. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jackson surprised Tessa with a trip to Salt Lake City. They left the children with Mrs. Patterson and spent a week exploring the growing city, attending the theater, and eating in restaurants. On their last night, they stood on the balcony of their hotel room looking out at the lights of the city. "You remember when you told me you would never love me?" Jackson asked, pulling her against his chest. "I remember. I was very foolish. You were scared. There is a difference. Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for loving me when I could not love you back." Jackson kissed the top of her head. "Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done. Even when you were pushing me away, I knew you were worth the wait. I do not know what I did to deserve you." "You do not have to deserve love, Tessa. You just have to be willing to accept it." They stood together in silence, holding each other and watching the city lights twinkle in the darkness. Tessa thought about the frightened, angry woman she had been when Jackson first rode up to her cabin. She had been so determined to protect herself that she had almost missed out on the greatest gift of her life. But Jackson had refused to let her hide. He had loved her patiently and persistently until she was brave enough to love him back. And in doing so, he had taught her that vulnerability was not weakness, that love was not a trap, and that the risk of pain was always worth the possibility of joy. The years continued to pass in a pleasant rhythm. Their children grew strong and healthy, learning to ride horses and help with ranch work as soon as they were able. James inherited his father's head for business and his mother's determination. Sarah was spirited and adventurous, always exploring the far corners of the ranch and bringing home interesting rocks or injured animals to nurse back to health. Thomas was gentle and thoughtful, with a gift for working with horses that surpassed even Jackson's considerable skill. In 1888, when Tessa was 34 and Jackson was 33, they built a new house on a hill overlooking both their original properties. It was a grand two-story structure with a wide porch that wrapped around three sides and large windows that caught the morning sun. The old ranch house became home for their growing number of employees, and Tessa's cabin was converted into a schoolhouse where their children and the children of their workers could receive an education. Tessa took on the role of teacher herself, discovering a passion for education she had not known she possessed. She taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and history, and she made sure that both boys and girls received equal attention and opportunity. Several of her students went on to attend universities in Salt Lake City and beyond, and she took fierce pride in their accomplishments. Jackson continued to expand the ranch, but he never let business consume him the way he might have if he had remained alone. He made time for his family, for long rides with Tessa through the mountains, for teaching his sons to rope and brand, for tea parties with Sarah and her dolls. He was fully present in his life in a way that made Tessa love him more with each passing year. In 1891, their daughter Emma was born, a surprise baby that neither of them had planned but both welcomed with joy. Emma was born with a clubfoot, and the doctor warned them that she might never walk properly. But Tessa and Jackson refused to accept limitations for their daughter. They took her to specialists in Salt Lake City, and even traveled to San Francisco to consult with a surgeon who had developed new techniques for treating the condition. Emma had 3 surgeries before she was 5 years old, each one frightening and expensive, but each one improving her mobility. By the time she was 7, she was running and playing with only a slight limp, and by 10, most people could not tell that she had ever had a disability. The experience taught all of their children about perseverance and refusing to give up, lessons that would serve them well throughout their lives. The town of Beaver grew and changed around them. The railroad arrived in 1892, bringing new settlers and new opportunities. Jackson and Tessa were instrumental in establishing the first bank in town, and Jackson served as one of the founding board members. They invested in local businesses and helped young ranchers and farmers get started with loans and mentorship. Through it all, their love remained the foundation of everything they built. They still sat together on the porch in the evenings, talking about their day and making plans for the future. They still danced at the monthly community gatherings, though now they often shared the floor with their own children. They still looked at each other across a crowded room and felt that flutter of excitement and contentment that comes from being with the person you are meant to love. In 1895, when James was 15 and beginning to take on serious responsibility at the ranch, he asked his father about how he had known his mother was the one he wanted to marry. Jackson considered the question carefully before answering. "I knew because being with her made me want to be a better man. I knew because even when she was pushing me away, I could not imagine my life without her in it. I knew because when I looked at her, I saw not just who she was, but who we could be together." But she told you she would never love you, James said. Were you not afraid you were wasting your time? Love is never a waste of time, son. Even if she had never come around, loving her would have been worth it. But I also believe that underneath all her fear, she wanted to be loved. She just needed someone patient enough to wait for her to realize it. That sounds hard. The best things in life usually are. Your mother is worth every moment of difficulty, every challenge, every compromise. When you find someone who makes you want to be better, someone who challenges you and supports you and loves you even when you are at your worst, you hold on to that person and you never let go. James took his father's words to heart. 2 years later, he met a young woman named Catherine at a church social, and he courted her with the same patient determination his father had shown his mother. They married in 1898, and Jackson and Tessa became grandparents the following year when Catherine gave birth to twin boys. Sarah married in 1900 to a lawyer from Salt Lake City, and they settled in the capital, where Sarah became active in the women's suffrage movement. Tessa was immensely proud of her daughter's activism and traveled to Salt Lake City several times to attend rallies and marches with her. Thomas showed no interest in marriage, preferring to pour his energy into developing new breeding techniques for horses. He built a successful business training and selling horses throughout the territory, and he remained living on the ranch, building his own house on the far eastern edge of the property. Emma, the youngest and perhaps the most determined of all their children, announced at 16 that she wanted to become a doctor. It was an audacious dream for a young woman in 1907, but Tessa and Jackson never questioned it. They helped her apply to medical schools, and when she was accepted to the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania, they celebrated with the same enthusiasm they had shown for all their children's achievements. As the years passed into the new century, Tessa and Jackson watched the world change around them. Automobiles appeared on the roads, electricity came to Beaver, and the wild frontier of their youth transformed into settled communities with schools, churches, hospitals, and libraries. But through all the changes, their love remained constant. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1909, their children threw them a party that brought together 3 generations of family and friends. The new church hall was decorated with flowers and ribbons, and a band played music from the old days. As Tessa and Jackson danced together in the center of the floor, surrounded by the people they loved and the life they had built together, Tessa thought back to that frightened young widow who had been so determined never to love again. "What are you smiling about?" Jackson asked, pulling her closer. "I am thinking about how lucky I am, how lucky we are. I am the lucky one. You gave me everything I ever wanted." "You gave me everything I did not even know I wanted," Tessa countered. "You showed me that love does not make you weak. It makes you brave enough to risk everything for something better." "Then I'll love enough for both of us," Jackson quoted, repeating the words he had said so many years ago. "You do not have to anymore," Tessa said, just as she had on their wedding night. "I love you enough for both of us too. Then we are going to have an embarrassing amount of love in this life." "I can live with that," Tessa said, and they laughed together as they had been laughing for 30 years. As they grew older, they slowed down but never stopped. They handed over more responsibility for the ranch to James and Thomas, but they remained active and engaged. They traveled occasionally, visiting Emma in Philadelphia and Sarah in Salt Lake City, meeting new grandchildren and watching their family tree expand. In 1915, Jackson suffered a heart attack while riding the range. It was not severe, but it scared them both badly. The doctor ordered him to rest and reduce his stress, and for several months, Tessa worried that she would lose him the way she had lost her first husband. But Jackson recovered, and though he moved slower and tired more easily, he remained vital and engaged with life. "I am not going anywhere yet," he told Tessa one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "I have too much living left to do." "You had better not," Tessa said, gripping his hand tightly. "I am not ready to do this alone." "You would never be alone. You have our children, our grandchildren, and half the territory would come running if you needed help, but I am planning to stick around for a good long while yet. I want to meet our great-grandchildren." He got his wish. Their grandson Michael, James's eldest son, married in 1918 and had a daughter in 1919. Jackson held his great-granddaughter for the first time with tears streaming down his face, and Tessa took a photograph that she treasured for the rest of her life. The years of the Great War touched their family, as it touched every family in America. Two of their grandsons enlisted and served overseas. Both came home, though one was injured and required months of recovery. Tessa and Jackson hosted a welcome home party that brought the entire community together to celebrate the boys' safe return and honor their service. In 1923, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. The party was even bigger than the one for their 30th, with family coming from as far away as Philadelphia and California. Emma, now a successful surgeon, took a month off work to spend time with her parents. Sarah brought her husband and 4 children. Thomas, still unmarried but surrounded by beloved nieces and nephews, organized a horse show featuring his finest breeding stock. At the party, James stood up to give a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught me that love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every day. Who showed me that the strongest partnerships are built on mutual respect and shared dreams. Who proved that, when you find the right person, every challenge becomes easier because you are facing it together. Thank you for loving each other so well that you showed all of us what marriage should look like." There was not a dry eye in the house as everyone drank to the toast. Tessa and Jackson sat together, holding hands, and Tessa thought about the long journey they had traveled together. 50 years of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge, growth and change. 50 years of loving this man who had refused to give up on her even when she had given up on herself. That night, lying in bed in the house they had built together on the hill overlooking their land, Jackson turned to her with a serious expression. "I need to tell you something," he said, Tessa's heart clenched with worry. "What is it?" "I want you to know that every single day of the last 50 years has been a gift. Every morning I wake up next to you, every evening we spend on the porch, every challenge we face together, every joy we share. All of it has been the greatest privilege of my life. Jackson, let me finish. I know we are getting old. I know we do not have another 50 years ahead of us, but I want you to know that if I died tomorrow, I would die happy because I got to love you. You made my life worth living." Tessa was crying now, unable to hold back the tears. "You made my life worth living too. I was so lost when we met, so determined to protect myself that I was barely living at all. You showed me what it means to truly be alive. Do you remember when you told me you would never love me? How could I forget? I was so foolish." "You were not foolish. You were healing." "But I am glad I did not listen to you." "So am I," Tessa said, kissing him softly. "So am I." They lived another 10 years together, years filled with more grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with the daily rhythms of ranch life, with the deep contentment that comes from a life well lived. Jackson's health declined gradually, but he remained sharp and engaged until nearly the end. He died in his sleep in 1933, at the age of 82, with Tessa holding his hand. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched: former ranch hands, business partners, children he had helped educate, young ranchers he had mentored. The preacher spoke about his kindness, his integrity, his devotion to family and community. But Tessa barely heard the words. She was remembering the young rancher who had ridden up to her cabin all those years ago, who had looked at her fierce independence and seen not a challenge to overcome, but a woman worth loving. After Jackson's death, Tessa moved back to the cabin where they had first met. It had been expanded and modernized over the years, but it was still recognizably the place where her new life had begun. She lived there for another 12 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who visited constantly. She remained sharp and active, attending church every Sunday, hosting family dinners, and telling stories about the old days. She died peacefully in 1945 at the age of 91, sitting in her rocking chair on the porch of the cabin, looking out at the land she and Jackson had built together. Her last words, spoken to Emma, who was visiting from Philadelphia, were simple and perfect. "I am ready to see him again." At her funeral, James read a letter that his parents had written together years earlier, to be opened after they were both gone. In it, they talked about their love, their life, and the lessons they hoped to pass on to future generations. "Love is not easy," the letter said. "It requires patience and courage and the willingness to be vulnerable. It means choosing someone over and over again, even when they frustrate you or disappoint you or scare you. It means believing that together you can weather any storm and celebrate every victory. But when you find the right person, when you find someone who sees you for who you truly are and loves you not despite your flaws but including them, then all the difficulty is worth it. Hold on to that person. Choose them every day. Build a life together that honors both of you. And never, ever take for granted the gift of being loved." The letter was passed down through the family, read at weddings and anniversaries, a reminder of the legacy that Tessa and Jackson had created. Their ranch remained in the family for generations, growing and evolving but always carrying the mark of their vision and their love. And on the hill overlooking the land they had worked together, 2 headstones stood side by side, bearing simple inscriptions. Jackson's read, "He loved enough for both of them." Tessa's read, "Until she loved him back." But if you looked closely, you could see that someone, probably one of their children or grandchildren, had added a small addendum to Tessa's stone, carved in the same careful letters. "And then they loved enough for everyone." It was the perfect ending to a love story that had transformed 2 stubborn, independent people into partners who built something greater than either of them could have created alone. A story that began with a warning and a promise, and ended with a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come. In the town of Beaver, Utah, where dusty streets had given way to paved roads, where the frontier had become civilization, where the Wild West was now just memory and legend, people still told the story of Jackson Zimmerman and Tessa Jenkins. They told it to their children and grandchildren, a reminder that true love requires courage, that patience can overcome fear, and that sometimes the best things in life come to those who refuse to give up on someone worth fighting for. And on warm summer evenings, when the sun set over the mountains in brilliant shades of gold and purple, if you stood on that hill near the 2 headstones, you could almost feel their presence. 2 people who had found each other against the odds, who had built a life and a love that transcended time, who had proved that when one person loves enough for 2, eventually the other person learns to love just as fiercely in return. Their story was not just a story of the Old West. It was a story of what it means to be human, to risk everything for connection, to believe that love is worth the pain it might bring. It was a story that reminded everyone who heard it that we are never truly alone, that there is always someone out there worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth loving with everything we have. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy Tessa and Jackson left behind. Not the successful ranch or the thriving family or the community they had helped build, but the simple truth that love, real love, the kind that transforms and endures and inspires, is always worth the risk. Always.